Kia ora everybody, welcome to tonight's webinar and thank you for joining me. I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing, move my camera around to the whiteboard. My name is Inez White and I am a property valuer. So if you don't know, that's a person who has qualifications and registrations to practice in New Zealand under the Valuers Act 1940 something. I apologise if I don't remember which one it is. I left the game about 2 years ago only to start my own business. I love being a valuer. I know that it brings to people's lives, but I just didn't feel that it was bringing enough value to my people's lives. And seen as, you know, my iwi and hapu gave me scholarships and grants while I was going to university to get all my degrees and stuff. It just didn't feel right that none of those people were my clients or were benefiting from my advice. So in 2016, 29th of January, I established Indigenuity, and we are a Māori business and we apply my experience and professional knowledge in property to scenarios that can benefit whānau Māori and iwi Māori. And I call it Indigenous thinking because it's not just us that connect to whenua in this way, it's anybody who has a connection to whenua around the world in their own countries, I believe has an Indigenous mindset, and that changes how they connect to whenua, okay? And therefore how we invest in land is slightly different. So tonight I'm going to talk about equity. What is equity? You can, by the way, leave comments, I think. You can leave comments, you can ask questions. I might not pick them up until after the kōrero, once the recording is finished, but I'll try my best to answer, okay? Remember to subscribe to the channel because I'm having a mini-series coming out on all these topics that I'm going to do free small webinars to all of you. The next Thursday is wills, prenups, and tangihana insurance, all right? Really big things that matter to Māori if we were able to do more about those things, those wills, prenups and stuff, you know, a lot easier time. Let's get back to equity. I hope this is around the right way for you. How we're going. Equity, to put it in a very simple way, is the portion of a property that you own or is not encumbered by debt. The other part is encumbered by debt. In the case of a property, it can be, it's most often the home loan, the debt that you borrowed against the property, okay? So if you have a property worth $100,000 and you put down, and it's worth $100,000, you put down 20%, so you have $20,000 ownership in there, that's your equity. The bank has given you $80,000 and that is encumbered by debt. If the property after over a year or 6 months or something increases to 200,000 and the debt is still 80,000, then you now own $120,000 worth of the property. That's $120,000 worth of equity, okay? So I think you all know those basics. What I wanted to talk to you is first about how I've used equity to get into property, and then how I think you can get into property using equity, some basics, all right? So the first thing you have to establish is how much something is worth, okay? So this is value. Value is not the same as price. So I'm going to write this. It is not equal to price. Okay, what I mean by that is you might have a house that is worth so value $200,000. Okay, maybe Nan and Koro are leaving you a house at $200,000, but they're going to sell it to you for 60 grand just so that they can clear the mortgage that's on it or something like that. You see what I mean? So this is the price. You just have to buy it for enough to pay off the remaining mortgage, but this is how much it's worth. So that's how much you might get for the home loan. So you have to get a home loan of 60 grand or pay 60 grand in money. But over here, this is your equity. So you have 200 minus $60,000. Once you take ownership of that property, you have $140,000 worth of equity. So if we work that out on deposit, that is equivalent. So if we look at that, that's equivalent to 70%. Deposit. Okay, so it's not so much deposit. This is when we use the word equity. Deposit is when you actually come up with the money. Now, how did I make this work for me? In 2014, I bought a property. Sorry about the hair. I've just been out shopping at Kmart. We all know what that's all about. Oh, heaps of people in there. 2014, I bought a property. I'm just going to make up the numbers. Let's say I bought it for 100 grand. It was worth, here's my numbers up here, 100 grand. Can you see that? Oh, sorry, other way around. Let's say it was asking, they were wanting 150,000, they wanted 200,000 for it, making up these numbers, but the proportions are the same. Okay, but I managed to get it for 100 grand. So the price was 100 grand. They wanted to sell it for 200 because that was the value. Now, there was an issue with it because it was a mortgagee sale. So it was being sold on the cheap. And so I picked it up, something worth 200 grand for 100 grand, remembering those are made up numbers. But that meant that I had, can you just answer me at home, how much equity did I have in it on the paper? So if that's the price, 100 grand. So 100 grand is 50% of 200. So my equity in it was 50%. Equity. How much cash did I have to put down for the deposit? So I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I didn't have to put down anything. That equity that I created was my deposit. Now, how did I create this? So like I said, it was a mortgagee sale. So this was the value, but they really wanted to sell it really fast before Christmas. The bank wanted to sell it really fast before Christmas. By the way, on an ethical basis, it was an overseas investment company that was under mortgagee sale, not a whānau. I would never, I think for me, contribute to that kind of loss for a whānau or a person. It was an overseas Chinese investment company that went bust. So, too right. So I picked up this whenua in my neighbourhood. These are make-believe numbers, but for 100 grand, but on the rates notice or evaluation, you need to have something to establish the value. So rates notice or evaluation, the valuation came in at, say, 200, but I was able to buy it for 100, which meant I was able to own a property and get deposit. My deposit was the equity. So remember, when we're talking in cash, we use the word deposit because you've actually got something and you're putting it on. And when you just got make-believe money called paper money, like paper value, Okay, it's called equity. So this is, how can we apply this to on a whānau level? Well, coming back to, this is a scenario that I see come across my table often, which is nan and koro want to leave me a house, or my mum and dad want to leave me the house. Now, we only have $10,000 owing on it, or a very low mortgage or something, but as long as they can be debt-free, I can have the house, and it's worth $200,000. Now, why is it difficult then to get a home loan? So this is what I want to answer for you now. Equity is an awesome thing if you know how to move it around on paper, right? If you know how to adjust it, and there's a technique to it. So just to recap what I've got here before I go on to the next part. Value does not equal price. So how much a property is worth is not necessarily the same as the price. You could buy it for more than it's worth or less than it's worth. Equity is when you pay a lot less than what it's worth, or you've paid the debt off down and now it's worth more, or you've paid nothing off on the debt, but it's just worth more. The difference between the debt or the amount you owe to the bank or someone else and how much it's worth is your equity. Value does not equal price. Okay. But, and you can, so this part over here was me talking about how if you use equity right, it can become your deposit for the property, or you can use it as a deposit for another property. So to buy your second property. Now, how do we use equity in a whānau sense to be able to help your children, your grandchildren, buy their first property? That's what we're going to go on to next, okay? All right. Working on the inheritance line, like the whānau property, or parents who own a house who've paid down their mortgage and are now wanting to help their children into the next place, okay? First of all, in order to use equity, so for equity to be your friend, so for equity to be a positive thing, you need to, number one, establish value formally. Okay, I'm going to give you two ways to do, well, three ways actually, to establish value formally for a bank. Because banks, did you know that banks will lend to you, say, let's say the rule is that they like you to have 20% at the moment. They will lend to you 80% of the price or the value, whichever is the lowest. So if you buy a house that's worth 200 grand, but you're only paying 60 grand, they'll only give you 80% of 60 grand. So nan and koro or mum and dad keep trying to help you out by selling you a property for cheap. But it doesn't help you out because the bank will say, oh, awesome, we love the fact that it's worth 200, but we're still only giving you 80% of the price. But you have to establish the value by, number one, a proper valuation, a market valuation. To do that, you will have to invest and pay, and I say invest because paying for a professional to give you advice is investing. Pay a property valuer, a registered property valuer, to give you a market valuation. They normally cost between $600 and about $750 for a single house on a plain block, something like that. Get a market valuation. The bank can then rely on this to say, rather than just taking your word for it that it's worth a lot of money or worth 200,000, they have somebody else's opinion. That person is not related to you. They're independent of you. They have that person's word and their report to say that it's worth 200,000. Okay. The second way is that if you're not borrowing too much, so they only have to give you 80%, they may be happy to use the rates notice. Now, as a property valuer, that's not tika, like it's not actually the same. The rates is for rates, market value is market value, and they are two different values. But for banks, they just need kind of an estimate. If they're not lending you too much money, they're not lending more than 80%, they might think it's a low enough risk to just use the rates value. For me, that's what happened in the property that myself and my tāne bought. It was on the rates notice, it was worth about, what's that numbers I used, make up numbers, 200,000, and I was buying it for 100,000. They were happy enough with that. We were only needing to borrow 50%, so not 80%, so they're like, oh, that's way off. So they were happy to use the rates value. The other way is to have a contract of sale with the official price or value on it. Okay, so that's another formal, because this is a legal document, so is that, right? So a contract of sale is another form of value or price that the bank can rely on to give them assurance that your property is worth what you think it is. So rule number one of using equity, establish the value formally for the bank. They can't just take your word for it and say, yeah, it's actually worth 200,000 and then we're only selling it to me for 60 grand. All right? So one of those options. If you have any questions about this part, please put comments on the video and I'll answer it afterwards in the next couple of days when I can get to answering your comments. Now, this is what I tell everybody to do when you're inheriting a property. Buy it from each other. Don't just hand it on, because you could stop each other from, you might be trying to give your moko or your child a property for cheap and then they can't withdraw their KiwiSaver because you have given them a name on the title, of their name on the title, which means they're a home buyer or homeowner, which means when they actually do want to buy another home and use their KiwiSaver and they've got 40 grand in there, they can't do it because Housing New Zealand or KiwiSaver rules are that if you have to be a first-time owner. Okay? Establishing value. In the scenario that you're a parent and you're trying to use your house over here, you've got a whare, you've paid it off, it's now worth 200,000, and you've paid off your mortgage, or you've paid off your home loan, and you're like only 50% owing on it. The other 50% is your equity. Okay? You can use your equity to help your kids into their first home. All right? And how that will work is that, might as well show you. So I have done this for clients, okay? Clients, when I talk about clients, whānau, I'm talking about both private. I have private clients, meaning people who come to me and haven't managed to get in on my whatu kāinga program, which is where we do group learning, and they've come to me one-on-one. And then the group learning under my whatu kāinga program that we do, and we try and get funded. So, you know, that's why I'm trying to share these videos, give everybody a head start. When you're a parent or grandparent or whānau member trying to get your family in, remember some basic rules. So, whānau equity, let's just call it that, eh? Rule number one, the chiefs at the top, the government, is it the IRT? Housing New Zealand, there's rules. You can't just like help everybody out and the banks can just use gifting or equity. So in this sense, I'm talking about gifting. You can't just gift to everybody, all right? You essentially have to be related. Related parties, so uncle, auntie helping out, or their niece or nephew, koro, nan, koro helping out their moko, mum and dad helping out their child, and you want to use your gifting either through money or your equity in your house, whatever. Okay, so related is generally best. Banks don't want to have to deal with whānau raruraru. Okay, no, they don't. That's why you've got to be related. Number 2, the bank have percentages that they can allow you to borrow on everything. So, as an example, you might own a house and you might have 50% equity. Kia ora. So your house over there, mum and dad, is worth 200,000. Can you see this? Okay, but you owe 50,000. Okay, worth 200k because you bought it when you got married. Now you only owe 50k because you've been paying off their mortgage. You think you had $150,000 to give to your kids to use as a deposit. No, doesn't work like that. To give it a really, summarize it for you, you want to buy this other house for your kids over here, and it's worth 150,000. Okay, so 150,000. The bank wants 20% minimum deposit. They might even want more deposit because it's a second house. Say 150,000, but let's go with 20% deposit. Okay, so they need to have 30,000, and your kids don't have 30,000, or they might have $10,000 worth of KiwiSaver, and you want to give them or gift them or whatever another 20,000. Okay, so how it will work is over here, number 2. I'm going to write it down. The bank will add together. The bank will add together 200 plus 150 equals 150k, all right, equals 350. So the value of the properties, these two houses over here, are worth 350,000. So they might say, don't always assume that you need to have 20% deposit because there's rules and everything that and risks that they have to take into account. So they might say, awesome, the first house was all right having 80% lending and 20% deposit, but now they might want you to have 2 houses and they might want you to have 30% equity or 30% deposit amongst the whole lending, because they don't look at it as in house 1 and house 2. They go, what's the risk over all of them? So 350k, let's say they say to you, we want you to have 30% deposit for the second house, for whatever the rules might be. What is 30% deposit equals 35, 70,000, 105,000. Okay, so they need to have $105,000 equity or deposit, equity, I hope you're following me on that, across both of these houses, okay, which means they will lend you $295,000. You're following me on that? So it's this less that. They are willing to make you an offer at 70% home loan equals 345, 245,000. Okay. So that's just one example. Lots of different factors, but I'm trying to show you how it works. It's not as easy as going, I have a house with 200,000, I have $150,000 equity, I want to give that equity to, I have $150,000 equity, I want to use all of that equity to help them buy a $150,000 house. That's not the mechanics of it. The bank goes, house A plus house B equals that. That's the value. they can name how much they want to have from you in deposit. All of the banks can have different criteria, but they can name it. And they might say, 2 houses, double the risk, we want more equity or more deposit this time. Then you calculate it from there. The value times the deposit they want or the equity they want equals that. So you go how much it's worth minus how much equity they need equals how much loan they might give you. So as you can see, they'll give you 245. So they'll pay off that. So that's 50 grand. And then you'll have $190,000 left to fund the rest of the project. Hello, you can buy the whole house. Does that make sense? Now they might, have I got those numbers right? 350, yeah, because you had a whole lot of equity over here and then they're both worth a lot of money. 350 minus 105 equals 245. Pay that off. That would look like a deal that they might say yes to, right? Now say this price of the house. So that's example A. What's an example of when it doesn't work? This house that you want to buy, that your kids want to buy, is worth 350,000, because they have now moved into the city, moved to Auckland, and decided that they want a flashy house for their first home. So let's go 350. Okay, that makes these numbers over here 550. All right, 550. 30% deposit of 550 is 55, 110, 165. Is that right? 550, 10% is 55, 110, 165. Okay? So, and this is all depending on all your income and everything. So 165, so that's 4. My maths is bad, man. 485, 385. Okay, so they'll give you 385,000. Now, they've got to pay off this, so there's only 335,000 left to buy the other house. Carl, doesn't work. So this second scenario won't work. I've probably gone and given you way too much technical information. It's probably confusing. But just replay this. I'm sure you can replay this video to see how it works. But that's the formula. If you're wanting to buy a house, use your parents' equity, grandparents' equity, or anything like that to buy your first home or help your family members into it, first of all, you need to be related. A lot of things are easier when you're related. If you're not related, you'll find the banks are they're not keen. And then there are also rules that come into play, okay, for gifting scenarios. When you gift the value of your home or you gift a home, you can't just, or gift money. Then, okay, you should be related and able to demonstrate that. Number 2, you don't use all of your equity. So just because you have a house with 200 and you only have a $50,000 loan doesn't mean that you have $150,000 to gift or use as equity for the next house. You only have a percentage of that. And that percentage isn't 80% of the equity. It's add them both together first, multiply how much the bank says you have to have as deposit, take that away from the original value, and that's what you have potentially as a home loan to use to buy your second property. So this also applies to if you're a first home buyer already and you're buying your second property. It's a really hard topic. Now you know why that I generally use this in like an hour and a half long webinars, but I wanted to inject something out there for you guys for free. I'm going to tease this out and try and put some notes and some comments and answer your questions. Thank you for joining me tonight. Don't forget, if you subscribe onto the channel, the next Thursday I'm doing wills, prenups, and tangihana insurance. I have all 3, and I want to share with you the ups and downs that I've had that have brought me to the decision that I need to have a will, and I update that every year. I have a prenup, call it a contracting out agreement in Aotearoa, and I have tangihana insurance. Join me for that next Thursday at 8 p.m. Kia ora everybody, and thank you for coming for my first YouTube webinar.